Presented from the Aishin Broadcast Studio at Babcock's Media.
Welcome to the AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today, our guest is Brett Hall from EMG. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, thank you.
Well, we're really happy to have you in this studio today, and we want to talk about streaming. Let's start with who's streaming, where are they streaming? Tell us a little bit about streaming.
Great question. We, EMG, my company, we've been doing this for a long time, and so I think sometimes we lose the forest through the trees, as they say. Mm-hmm. And so recently we kind of stepped back and said, where are we? Like, what's the state of play with streaming right now? So, few facts just about, kind of the industry or really the consumption of it by the American population. So, over 90% of all American households have at least one CTV device. That's either a natively smart TV that comes with, internet connectivity that lets you stream, your favorite streamers, or enablement devices like Roku, Amazon Fire Sticks. Mm-hmm. So 90% of houses have that. That's nearly ubiquitous. Streaming is the number one way now for the last 2 years to consume television content. So movies, TV shows, etc., anything made for TV, it's the number one way. It beats broadcast and cable for 2 years running now. And then lastly, the average individual is streaming at least 17 hours a week. So it's pretty substantial. And then if you kind of double click on, okay, well, are these younger generations, older generations? So something like 75% or more of Americans 50 and older are also streaming. So this is now kind of gone full generational. And then if you double click even more, ad-supported streaming. Streaming kind of took the inverse not approach, but its adoption happened kind of the inverse of traditional. Traditional, it was ad-supported for many, many years, and then you had the premium, HBOs, et cetera, the subscription model came about. In streaming, it was the opposite. It started with a subscription model, and now it's slowly moved towards the ad-supported model. So 57% of all Americans are consuming ad-supported streaming. So now we're seeing a big shift from kind of the way that it's being monetized and paid for. Every major streamer of consequence outside of really, we'll call it Apple TV, has an ad-supported tier.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were saying that I only know one person in the whole world that doesn't stream, and it's my 93-year-old grandmother.
Yeah, it probably hasn't gone fully there yet, but we're getting close. Yeah, I use my parents as a bellwether, and they started streaming a few years ago.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much just about everybody is at least in part streaming. They might still have cable, but they're definitely dabbling, we'll say. Yeah.
Let's talk about the ads.
Sure.
Are streaming impressions a commodity? I mean, are they all kind of the same? Is it like gold or steel?
Yeah, great question. You would think on how it is often sold that it would be a commodity, and I say that because typically you're talking a lot about the CPM. What is the CPM? And that's typically, that's sort of the sales mechanism. And really, CTV or streaming rather is anything but a commodity right now. So when something becomes a commodity, a product or service is on its way to or has become a commodity, typically the telltale signs are you have an industry that's consolidating. So streaming is not consolidating at all right now. The fragmentation is wild. In fact, we recently published a report called the Gauge Plus. It follows the Nielsen's report that actually tracks streaming consumption. And the biggest wedge, if you just kind of look at the big streamers and their share of the market, the biggest wedge is other at like 48%. So, it's a very fragmented market. The long tail is huge. So it's not consolidating. It probably will eventually. They'll start kind of gobbling each other up, but right now it's not. Mm-hmm. It's not shrinking, which is typically what a commodity market will do, in that the market size starts to go down. Streaming ads or streaming, consumption, the ad subscriptions has only increased. It's probably, if I had to say, grown about a 20% clip year over year. So it's growing. And, typically the biggest kind of marker of a commodity market is that you don't really have differentiation between products. So like, this milk and that milk, or this orange juice and that orange juice is sort of the same. I'm just buying based on price or convenience. In streaming, it's anything but that. I mean, typically these streamers, the way that they compete for our attention is by investing in content. So I'll get Netflix because I want to watch that show. I'll get Prime Video because I want to watch that movie. Or I'll get Apple TV Plus because I want to watch the latest World Series doc about the Angels, the Dodgers. I was just at an Angels game. The Dodgers-Yankees series from 2024. Mm-hmm. And so it's anything but sort of, commoditized in the sense of that it's non-differentiated. That's actually the thing that is driving all this competition, is the different content and the ways of accessing it through these different streamers. And so it's not a commodity, and treating it as such would be a mistake because there's so much value and opportunity to maximize your streaming campaign from an advertising standpoint. And so it's not, but it often is treated as one, which is a real, unfortunate problem.
Well, I mean, from a car dealer's perspective, I mean, like, how do they differentiate the value of one impression versus another? And I mean, you just named, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 streaming services. There's probably 600 of them out there.
Sure.
Like, how do you even get started?
Absolutely. So if it's not a commodity, if I'm not just going to buy on price, how do I tell the difference? Where do I find value? How do I achieve that value? And so to overly simplify it, what we would argue is you should be looking at the outcomes that your streaming is creating, business outcomes rather. So, we often will talk about web engagement or physical arrivals or sales. Tying out a business outcome that you care about, in this case as a dealership, business outcomes that you care about, tying that back and creating an attribution feedback loop to your streaming media is paramount. And then once you collect enough data, once you've done it enough times, you can start seeing pretty obvious trends of what's working and what's not working. What hours, and some of this is kind of hearkening to lessons learned in broadcast. So day parting still matters in CTV. It's much more effective to advertise during the day than at night and overnights at least. The days of the week actually matter. The inventory that you're buying, the ad inventory, the different audiences that you're buying. So once you actually create that feedback loop of connecting a business outcome to your streaming ads, you can start parsing out what is driving value and what's not. Mm-hmm. And again, not just adjudicating the value based on price, which is typically what you do in a commodity market, going back to your last question.
Yeah.
So it's important. Now, that's obviously a tall task for maybe a dealership to do, which is why we always encourage, hey, talk to your streaming vendor, whoever's doing your streaming, talk to them about how they're adjudicating or measuring the value of their streaming, and really of any digital marketing, of which streaming falls into. So that's kind of the approach that we take.
How much control how much control do you actually have of the content that your ads are being placed on? I mean, is it somewhere? I mean, in the broadcast days, you say, okay, I want to advertise, on the 6 o'clock news, and you could easily do that. But now, I mean, you've got 90% of American households that are streaming on 600 different services that are all consuming whatever button they click. I mean, it's not just 600 channels; it's 600 channels with 10 million options to watch. Like, how
It's a great question, and it is very different. What you're kind of teasing is probably the biggest issue or paradigm shift that we have to kind of take dealers through, or their agencies that we work with. Mm-hmm. It's actually an inverse of how it used to work in broadcast or traditional. So generally speaking, in traditional TV, which includes cable broadcast, we'll call it non-CTV, non-streaming, you would find your audience you would buy certain inventory, the 6 o'clock news, sports, to proxy the audience that you're interested in. Mm-hmm. So a very stereotypical generic example is, I want to sell trucks. Men disproportionately buy trucks, so I'm going to advertise on sports because men disproportionately watch more sports. That's generally kind of how that worked. You actually flip that in streaming, not unlike how you would flip this in any other digital ecosystem. We first constitute an audience. We figure out who's in market for a truck using all the different data providers and signals and CDPs, et cetera, that kind of gambit. We constitute that audience, start there, and then say, wherever that audience happens to be streaming, that's where we're going to buy. So in short, it's an audience first strategy. And so let's say there's 1 million people in this generic audience. It's not that we're going out and buying Hulu or Prime Video or Netflix or whatever the streaming may be. It's we're buying a person who we believe is in market to buy a car, whatever that may be, whenever they happen to be streaming, which is why we definitely advocate for what we call a platform-based approach, because like I mentioned before, there's a very big long tail in streaming. And so if you're not connected or integrated with all of these different streaming platforms, you might just miss someone outright because of how niche different viewing habits are.
Gotcha. So
makes sense.
So basically, you're identifying the people that you want to reach, and then you're just going to meet them wherever they are.
Meet them where they are. Exactly. Well said. We're going to meet them where they are versus, I'm going to hopefully find them on whichever streaming service that I think they might be at. We don't have to think. We don't have to guess. We can, well, not that we don't have to think. We don't have to guess on where we think our consumers are. We find them based on that audience.
So it really doesn't matter what they're watching. To you, it's insignificant what they're watching. You just want them to be watching your ad because you know they're the right person.
1,000%.
Cool.
100%. That is very well said. It does not matter what they're watching. As long as the ad inventory that we're buying against is qualified. Qualified is actually binary. It either is or it isn't. I can talk about what qualified or unqualified inventory is in a minute. As long as it's qualified, and basically qualified means a real, actual human being is watching and consuming the streaming, it does not matter what they're watching. So that's a big shift, big paradigm shift that, dealers are really any marketer who is now stepping into streaming. They kind of have to divorce themselves from the thinking of how they bought traditional, because it very much is a different way of going about it.
I'm curious. Let's talk about qualified. So what? Because you said qualified means a human's watching it. Like, can you elaborate on that? Because that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So easily my favorite example or story of this is in the early days when we started focusing on streaming more exclusively in our business before we did more traditional programmatic display. We started buying all of these different streaming apps. So we would start getting all this data back about kind of where we were buying. And because we had our attribution system in place that we were measuring at that point, web engagements and a little bit of walk-ups, we could see tied to all this different ad inventory that we were buying, who was going to the website, who was walking into the store, et cetera. And then over time, you basically got to see, okay, what's sort of an average performance for any given, let's say, ad inventory, right? And over time, you would start noticing these deviations. Some were doing a really good job and some weren't. And so that's how you would, in that case, optimize for inventory. Well, we noticed, backing up a little bit, on these inventory reports, it's not like it says Netflix or Prime Video. It's typically like an app ID that's nonsensical. It's alphanumeric number that has a code that you then ultimately, with enough time and energy, can go research and find. So you don't get this clean list of like, oh, what you bought. There's all these app IDs and codes that with enough time and energy, you can deduce what it is. So we found this ad inventory source that we spent a lot of money on, and it received almost no walk-ins, which was very uncommon. Even if we were bad at this, just the laws of averages, you would have seen more kind of walk-ins or engagement. And so we started digging, and we found out there was an app on Roku called Dog TV. Dog TV is content made for owners of pets who went to work and it would occupy their dogs and cats.
Oh, wow.
It would be bouncing balls and squirrels running up trees. It was hilarious, by the way. Because we actually started watching, like, what is this? And we started, it's Dog TV. Dog TV had ads. So Dog TV, every 15, 20 minutes, they had an ad pod. You'd see ads, sure enough, rolling through there. So the reason we never saw web engagement or walk-ins was because literally the dogs and the cats were watching this stuff. It wasn't real people. It was a real ad. It just wasn't real people. Now that is not even extreme. That's one of my favorite. It's kind of, but it really kind of drives home the point of just because a TV, is on, just because it's streaming, and just because you have, kind of an ad rolling through, doesn't mean that someone's watching. And if you know what you're looking for, you can easily start deducing, is a real actual human being on the other end of that, or are they not? Mm-hmm. And so kind of taking a step further, that's how we say we do, we protect against ad fraud, which is if we're not seeing outcomes that are expected, we just cut it. So Dog TV, unfortunately, for the dogs, we're cut.
so you're able to take, even if I'm on the list of people you want to reach and it's my device, if it's so I guess Dog TV is non-qualified, and so like you're able to see Dog TV and maybe other apps that are like that don't perform. You can actually say, okay, I don't want this one. I want to follow Brian everywhere he goes, but not here, here, and here.
100%. You're still in the audience. Mm-hmm. You're still an addressable household that we're going to reach. We're just not going to reach you in Dog TV. And it goes on the blacklist, which we have an extensive blacklist or block list of, apps or streams, excuse me, of ad inventory that for whatever reason, whether it's Dog TV, whether it's the publishers are manipulating the inventory to create higher yield of whatever might be going on. It's just raw, absolute, fraud. If it's not performing, it's just out. It's just that simple. So that's how we continually optimize and create more media efficiency in streaming.
And so, I guess, so this is your private list. Like, this isn't a list you can subscribe to. So, I guess that would be the value of working with somebody that has a lot of experience in this, because you've had the time to build the list of the places you don't want to waste money.
Well, thank you. Yes. That would be one of the reasons. Yeah, I mean, so, quick data point, we've been doing this for about 7-8 years, streaming for the automotive retail industry. We've collected tracked rather, 80 million or so dealer conversions, which ranges from web engagements to walk-ins to sales. So, and those outcomes all attributed back to a streaming ad. So about 80 million or so. So using all of that data 7 years collected, you have that corpus of data that you can just start making decisions on where and how to find efficiency, so that you don't have to, suffer the dog TVs or the whatever else, right? It's already been accounted for.
That could be a really expensive learning process if you had to start from scratch.
We like to say you're standing on the shoulders of 7 years of experience and of knowledge and of data collection. So if you started today, you're getting 7 years worth of learnings for the price of nothing. So I do. The first campaign that we ever did, I was just talking to a buddy who she started teaching probably 10 years ago, and she said, "Man, I shudder at the very first lesson I gave 10 years ago versus today, because you're just getting better and better and better." So it's like anything else: experience, knowledge, data, and then ultimately you just create a better and better product or service.
Presented from the Aishin Broadcast Studio at Babcox Media.
Well, I'd like to kind of circle back to CPM. I've heard you say
Sure.
CPM is kind of like a penny stock. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So analogizing streaming and the CPMs within streaming to the stock market, it's probably one of our favorite analogies to tease out even further why CPM shouldn't be the thing that you ultimately strive for, adjudicate. Not that it doesn't matter, but that it really is contextualized on how it should matter. So if we sort of tease out that analogy of if streaming CPMs are like stocks, and you continually are looking for the least expensive or the cheapest CPM you can get, that would not be unlike if you called your stockbroker tomorrow and said, "Hey, I want you to optimize my portfolio, not for which companies are going to return the best value, not which companies we think have the best runway, whatever it may be. I want you to optimize for the lowest cost per share," meaning whatever that may be, couple bucks, right? And so you're not dealing with, the Mag 7 or the blue chips. I know Mag 7 has been a little beat up in the last couple of days, but hey, other than that, the point stands, which is you don't optimize your investing that way, because that is an irrelevant data point. The cost of a stock, is not the driver of value. If you were to pursue that as a strategy, though, what would ultimately happen is you would have a bunch of penny stocks in your portfolio, or like meme coins. Right? You would just have a portfolio that isn't optimized to return value. It's optimized to lower your cost per share. And so if you sort of take that analogy back into the streaming universe, if you're just constantly looking for the lowest cost CPM, you will get, for example, the dog TVs of the world. Yeah. Because, they're willing to, and you're just going to continually race to that bottom. You'll start buying overnight. You'll start buying dog TV. You'll start buying other just maybe outrod fraudulent activity, instead of looking at what is driving value for my business, for my dealership, independent of what it costs. Now, what I'm not saying is you should be overpaying for ad inventory. You should just be seeking what returns the best value, and then figure out, okay, that streamer is providing really good value with that audience. Let's go to work on figuring out how we can get a cost reduction there. Mm-hmm. But that's based on the value it's producing. It doesn't start with, I just want to go buy it for less. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's a common analogy we try to use to sort of, warn people about the dangers of just pursuing that as a unilateral strategy in their streaming.
Well, let's say you and I, we work at the same dealership, and we decide that we want to get into streaming. It's a good idea. We want to do it.
Sure.
Where do we start to develop an effective streaming strategy for our store?
Kind of how you maximize it. Yeah. So what I like to do, if people are sort of either new to it or they want to understand, okay, what are the levers I can pull on? Really, in streaming, I like to think of it as there's 3 pillars that sort of streaming stands on. There's your audience, we've talked a little bit about. That's the who. The ad inventory or the inventory. That's the what or the where. Netflix, Prime Video, etc. And then there's the attribution, tracking how well did it work. And it's those 3 sort of pillars that ultimately constitute the ecosystem of how you can, step into it and maximize it. So if you sort of take those on their own, you can kind of start really figuring out where you can maximize your investment. So let's start with audience. So with audience, the first thing you should know is CTVs don't have cookies. So, the cookie kind of dying with Google Chrome and everything else actually didn't impact us much 7 years, 8 years ago, because we were already dealing with an ecosystem that didn't have cookies to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so investing in and determining what sort of technology is going to help you do your audience targeting when you don't have a cookie. So investing in and making sure they understand, what a replacement technology like household graph, for example, which is the way that you ultimately resolve that you're Brian, you might be interested for a car in a non-cookieless world, or in a cookieless world, excuse me. And so once you have that in place, once you kind of understand, okay, I have a set of technology that's going to help me resolve identity, which is ultimately what audience targeting comes down to. Then getting back to, once I have that, how do I then systematically work through which audiences are working and which audiences are not? Mm-hmm. So that's sort of there's more there, but that's kind of generally speaking, how you might approach audience. Inventory, as we've been talking about, the streaming ecosystem is highly fragmented. There's tons of different streamers, as you mentioned earlier. Not only are there lots of different streamers, there's lots of different content within those streamers. And so having what we would argue the best approach is a platform-based approach, meaning you're not just going out to Netflix and buying there. You're not just going to Prime Video and buying there, because you're going to miss so much of the market. So using a platform, which is typically going to sound like a DSP, to then pipe into all of this different inventory makes the most sense, so that you can address all of your audience wherever they may be streaming. The other thing we would say, and this is something that dealers can just kind of ask their vendors, is, are you going direct to the inventory source? So unfortunately, because of the dog TVs out there, which I wouldn't even say that's malicious, they're just out there selling ads, you want to really understand what you're buying. And to do that, ultimately, the best way to do that is go directly to the source. Go all the way back to the person that's selling the ads and set up deals directly with them. Doing so will prevent some of this mischief that you can just save yourself time and headaches.
Yeah.
And then lastly, with attribution, not only are there no cookies like we talked about, but there's no clicks. There's no click on a remote that lets you click on it. It's a 30-second ad that you would see on TV. And so again, setting into motion a way to track what is going on, which is also going to be dependent on household graphing technology, not to get too technical, to understand and track what business outcomes are happening as a result of your streaming, so that you can in turn optimize. Those are some of the those audience, inventory, attribution, and the things I mentioned within. Those seem to not really constitute a lot of the conversation when we are talking with either agencies or dealerships. And that's a big area that you can maximize the opportunity. So what I would say is, generally, I think most people now understand there is this big opportunity with streaming, because the reach and its ubiquitousness and all the different opportunity there is for targeting and segmentation. And where I think we're probably still at, unfortunately, in the space, is most of that is not being taken advantage of, because it actually deviates pretty heavily, not only from traditional, but a lot of the technology that was with the previous digital marketing booms, whether that's social search, SEO, et cetera. A lot of that technology you just can't rely or depend on, like a cookie, for example. So the industry still has a long way to go in terms of really growing up and making sure that end buyers understand the opportunity and how to maximize it. Absolutely.
Cool. You've used the term CTV a couple times, and I think a lot of people are more familiar with the term OTT.
Yes.
Can you kind of can you tell us what those are, how they differ?
Yeah, absolutely. So OTT stands for over the top, and it is really more of a reference to how the content that you're consuming is being delivered, and not what is being delivered. So over the top, anytime you hear over the top, it basically just means the content that I'm consuming is being delivered via an internet connection, as opposed to a traditional means like cable or satellite. So anytime you hear over the top, it basically just means I'm watching what I'm watching because of an internet connection and not through a traditional means. That's over the top. Over the top now, you have an array of internet-connected devices that you can consume media against. You can consume it on your mobile phone, a tablet, a desktop, a TV. All of these are internet connected devices that OTT ultimately are compatible with. The reason I keep on saying CTV and the reason that we would take a CTV only or first approach is that the value of advertising only on CTVs in an OTT, we'll call it strategy or OTT environment, gets you the most bang for your buck. That full living room experience of seeing, an ad break during whatever you're streaming will create better results than if you're doing, we'll call it an OTT strategy, which encompasses all those other devices. And then CTV stands for connected TV, kind of skipped over that part. So really it's kind of like squares and rectangles, right? All squares are rectangles, not all rectangles are squares. So when you have an OTT approach, that can include CTV as an end device that someone's watching. We only focus on CTVs because of the immense value that it creates compared to the other devices. The other devices aren't meaningless or valueless, rather. It's just that you can get the most value out of connected TV.
So the connected TV is strictly the television.
Strictly the television.
The OTT can be any device.
Any device that's internet connected.
Now, would because you said any media that's coming over the internet. I mean, could it also be YouTube? Could it also be digital display? I mean, could it be all of those things too?
It can be. So this is where it gets a little gray. So CTV advertising generally, and again, it's not like there's some regulation or like actual. There's definitions, but there's not like regs on what is and is not. Generally speaking, though, you're looking for what's called FEP, full episode player content, or really think about it, content that you would otherwise would have seen on TV. Scripted, could even be non-scripted, content, sports, etc. Things that you would have otherwise seen on TV. YouTube, a lot of YouTube is user-generated. They do have some premium content there. That's where the lines are starting to get a little fuzzy, because you can stream movies and shows and whatnot. But generally speaking, connected TV or OTT is going to focus on that FEP or made-for-TV content, whereas something like YouTube is more UGC, and therefore it's still in the streaming bucket. It's just not necessarily, as we think about it, in the connected TV advertising bucket. But that's not like a hard line or anything. You know what I mean? We're just trying to focus on the counterpoint or the counterpart to a traditional TV ad experience.
Gotcha. I mean, I can see the value. I mean, if I think about myself. I mean, sometimes I'm at the gym and I'm listening to YouTube. I'm listening to a podcast or something on YouTube or whatever. Yeah. And I'm not watching, but an ad comes on, and maybe I'm definitely not paying as much attention, or maybe I'm cutting the grass, or whatever, and I'm listening. So I'm not paying the same amount of attention I would be if I'm sitting in the living room with my wife and we're watching The Walking Dead or something on Netflix.
And the data tends to bear that out. Tends to bear out that you can find generally all of this content just about anywhere. I mean, literally, I'm sure one day soon enough it'll be on our watches. So you can find it just about anywhere. And the question becomes, where are you going to get the most value out of a strategy for getting the most bang for your buck? And so far right now, that is focusing on CTVs as opposed to a multi-device strategy, at least in the area of streaming.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, this has been a great interview. Is there anything more you'd like to share with our audience today, Brett, before we go?
Yeah, there is something that just kind of came to mind before we started talking. I made that comment about the forest through the trees. There's so much capability and opportunity that exists within streaming, just like there is in any digital marketing. And really what we're starting to focus in on, even though we obviously are capable of and can produce an array of different reporting that shows the ROI of your media based on business outcomes, at the end of the day, what we are now starting to stress more and more to dealers and creating sort of reporting consoles and other metrics around is your store doing better as a result of, in this case, streaming? We're not doing this for our health. And at the end of the day, I do have a report and I do have metrics that I can show you. But independent of that, are you feeling a difference? Are you getting people walking your store? Hey, I saw your ad on TV when I was watching Netflix. Are you getting more ups? Are you getting more sales? Are you taking market share, or are you losing it? Because at the end of the day, like I mentioned, we're not just doing this because it really needs to drive value. And so we're now emphasizing more and more and tracking and helping dealers understand, how is your local market share for your store improving as a result of doing this? And the reason we're doing that is because that's ultimately where marketing investment should be going to create value. Is I'm getting more for it, not just so that I can show a report that shows some attributed metric, which we can do and do, but unfortunately a lot of those metrics can be gamed. I mean, either out of ignorance or malice, those attribution metrics can be misleading. And so at the end of the day, what's not misleading, what I cannot fake, what no one can fake, is I am doing better as a store in my market as a result of doing this. And that's where, which actually gets kind of old school and traditional when you think about it. It's just, at the end of the day, hey, are you doing better or not? Even though, there's all these amazing digital touch points and graphics and metrics that we can show you, at the end of the day, if your store is not improving as a result of doing your streaming strategy, you definitely want to kind of reconsider what you're doing.
Yeah.
No matter how good the reports look.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
I mean, and, that does make sense. I mean, in the old days, you had billboards, newspapers, and television commercials, maybe some radio spots, and okay, did we have a good weekend or not? How many cars we sell on Saturday, right? I mean,
right.
And you couldn't attribute it to the billboard. You couldn't attribute it to the newspaper. Maybe you could if it was a particular car, but it was really hard to do that. And so I understand what you're saying is through this strategy, you want to see lift at your store. You want to
100%
sell more cars, service more cars, make more money.
You're doing the things you do to get more business, and just not getting caught up in every little fine-tuned metric. But don't lose the forest through the trees. Are you doing better as a result of this or not? A quick story or anecdote I have about, it's not related to auto. For a while, we were pretty active in consumer packaged goods, CPG, and for their streaming needs. And I remember I asked a guy once, it was a very DR question. I kind of asked him like, hey, what channel works the best for you? It was a big consumer packaged goods company. And he kind of looked at me, he was VP of marketing. And he's like, all of it. My end caps at the grocery store, my TV advertising, my stadium sponsorships, like they all kind of create that 360 experience that drives the ROI for my product. Because I was expecting him to say some, sort of super analytical, like, oh, well, we've done this multi-touch attribution regression model, and we can ultimately deduce the value of each touch. I'm not saying they don't have that, but he was like, it all kind of works together, and it all drives value, which is a very old school way of thinking about this. But at the end of the day, he was actually, I think, more right about this than a lot of marketers I meet who have all these analytics and tools because they just get so caught up in every little thing. They don't really pull back and say, am I doing better or not?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I guess that's the only metric that really matters, right?
Yeah. Which again, you got to have those deterministic metrics so that you at least can have directional evidence of what's going right. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how optimized or something is that shows a good result in a media report. If it's not driving value, if it's not driving on the ground sales and market share take, then what are we doing here? Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in today.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time to join us for this AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today our guest has been Brett Hall from EMG. We hope to see you again on a future episode. This one's Over the Curb and Burning Gas.